Hello, I'm Oscar Crawford, and this is the teaching ministry of New Eden. Thank you for joining me. Beginning today and for the next 8 days, I'm going to be presenting messages celebrating Black History Month 2013. I will be doing it from Christian context, and I'll be using the Holy Bible as the reference for the messages that I'm going to deliver. The theme for the week will be Resurrection, the Revival of Black Men. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for the privilege to share with others right now, to draw our attention to those things that we need to remember, those things that we need to be aware of, and those things that we need to be concerned about that we're building for the future. Help us to look back and be aware that we're standing on the shoulders of all who came before us. Help us to live worthy of all that they did for us, and that we might become able to do the things that we need to do to continue to build family, community, relationship all over your world. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. For the very first message, I want to direct your attention to the book of Ezekiel, the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, and it will serve as the backdrop for all we will be saying for the next 8 days. Particularly, the chapter we'll be focusing on is Ezekiel chapter 37. In Ezekiel chapter 37, and I'll be running the text along the bottom of the screen for you. In Ezekiel 37, we find that God is speaking to a prophet. And God has taken the prophet into a setting where all the prophet can see are dried, bleached out bones, scattered all over the floor of a desert valley landscape. All right, it's very clear here that nothing much is going on. Now, remember, the theme for the week is resurrection, the revival of black men. I'm going to suggest to you that the contemporary condition of black men is like that found in Ezekiel chapter 37, where there is a dead black, yes, I said dead black army's remains lying scattered on a desert valley floor. And God asked the prophet, can these bones live again? And the prophet said what all of us with any level of intellect would say, God, only you know. All right, now, if resurrection is the theme, it literally does not just imply, but declare something is dead. There is no need for resurrection where death has not taken place. Well, death has taken place for an entire black army. Look at the text as we have the translation referred to popularly as King James's translation of the Hebrew and Greek scriptures that we'll be taking a look at over the next 8 days. And you'll discover that these are an army's remains. I'm declaring to you that I believe this army, this dead army, is the remains of black men who lost their way, forgot their responsibilities, forgot their relationship to God, forgot their relationships to themselves, forgot their relationship to their families and communities and beyond. And so forgetting what their responsibilities were and getting caught up in only enjoying the things they thought they could acquire, they died. They died without purpose, died without anybody remembering their names. And I hope if you're listening to me today, that is not what you want your legacy to be. All right, so what happens when God speaks to the prophet Ezekiel, and he says, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel says, God, only you know. Ezekiel is bright enough to say that he doesn't know the answer to that question, but only God can really know the answer to the question. And then God says to him what we have to become brave enough to say to each other. We have to be brave enough to say to the brother who's addicted to drugs, who has been convicted of crimes, who's living a life of irresponsibilities, not being responsible for self or any others. We have to be able to say to brothers, if we love black men, and I declare we ought to. I declare being black, you ought to love black people, you ought to love black men. And that's not the end, it is just the beginning of loving all people. Please don't get this twisted. While this message is directed primarily to black men during the celebration of Black History Month for 2013, this message is applicable for all people everywhere in all times. I hope you heard that. All right. So we have to be willing to say to black men who we know are living out conditions that are neither loving nor productive, we have to say, brother, you need to get your act together. You need to come back to life. You are vitally important. There are people who would depend on you for managing life, especially children, especially your wives, especially your family, especially your community. You are vitally necessary, but you can't give anything if you're living out dead conditions. Now, what are some of those? Well, poverty is a big one. And poverty affects black men disproportionately to the way other men of other cultures are affected. That's just a fact. Just search these things out. You can find it in research I'm generally sharing with you is true. Black men are disproportionately affected by every negative socioeconomic indicator that exists. I wish that weren't true. I'm afraid it is. Here's a holy however. We don't set the standards for the examination, and when you allow other people to always measure you and give you an evaluation, you're going to always come up short. In the context of the way we decipher information right now, black men are negatively affected by every socioeconomic indicator that is measured. All right, so we're sicker, we break the law more, we create children and are not responsible for them more. I don't know that that's true. Because if you look at welfare standards of people who are receiving welfare money to live across the United States, those aren't all babies made by black men. Just take a look at that, see who the demographic is that's having the most babies for which men are not being responsible for those children, and you'll find out that all those men aren't black. But we do have that to account for. If we're drug addicted and we're in jail, or we are not working, or we're illiterate, we're not adding a lot to the development of culture and community. Are you listening to me? All right. So as God says to the prophet, can the bones live again? And he says, God, only you know. Then we have to be clear about that too. Only God really knows what our next chapter is. Wouldn't you like it that our next chapter would be that we became a resurrected black army? And listen, if you'll recall some of what the scriptures have already taught us in the book of Joshua, Joshua led an army around an impenetrable wall in Jericho at the direction of God, told to march around the walls one time for 7 days, and on the seventh day 7 times, and then blow a horn. Those walls fell. Listen, the analogy there is where people who are organized and working well together march together, walls fall. Those things that hold you back, those things get out of your way because you have an organized strategy for success. Akko Cambone in Columbus, Ohio, working with Black Youth Leadership Development, used to say, here's the plan. You got to get up, you got to show up, be on time with a plan and the commitment to carry it out. You think we could do that all over again? Listen, people used to do that centuries before the 21st century with nothing. Some of the things that people pay a lot of money to eat in restaurants were literally handed to black people who literally were slaves because it was the thing that nobody wanted. There was a time nobody ate shrimp. Not in this country because it was a scavenger of the sea and nobody bothered with it. But when poor black people started to eat shrimp, guess what else started to happen? Shrimp got to be on the restaurants' menus across the country. Just a fact. And then there are these things that loosely are hog guts called chitlins back home that if you order them in certain restaurants now, you're going to be paying through the nose. And oh my goodness, I can't tell you, I don't understand it. It's just the case. So we who have a history of creating great things out of nothing, do you think we might be able to take some of the resources we have access to now and build a better future? And not just for ourselves and people like us, but for everybody. We have made a significant vital contribution to the development of the United States. And I know that's controversial in a lot of context. I know it's controversial. But we have. Without black people, there's a whole lot of things we take for granted right now, like the traffic light. Yeah, open heart surgery, those kinds of things that if it hadn't been for black people, they would have been slower coming because people who came before us were responsible for the designing of their creation and invention. All right. God says, can these bones live again? And then he said to the prophet, look, speak to these bones. Now, that has to mean that somebody alive amongst us now has to start speaking to black men living out dead conditions. Imagine that. Are you brave enough? Are you brave enough, black men, are you brave enough to speak to brothers who are marginalized, saying to them, wake up, let's work together, let's be responsible together, let's build community, let's help you build your family, help you get yourself back together. What do you think we might be able to accomplish together after we accomplish those basic kinds of things? People who are broke and sick, are literally broke and sick. It is difficult for those who are broke and sick to make a valuable contribution to the development of self or others. But when we work with diligence consistently to become healthier and getting together with others who are organizing plans to be constructive, we can make a difference. Listen, when the prophet listened to God and God said, "Speak to the bones that they might live again," guess what happened? Man hears from God, man speaks to bones. Bones that are laying on the floor, a desert valley landscape floor, speaks to those bones, and here's what is described. It is described as if the wind from the four corners of the earth began to swirl and move around like hurricane and tornado force winds, and they blew in that valley, and those bones started to clankle and clack, and they began to click, and they began to come back together. Okay, you've been to a lot of spook movies. I'm sure you've either been to a few or you know people who go to them regularly. Spook movies, people go pay to get scared. Now, we don't have to go to the movies. We can read the scriptures and find some very frightening things. And if you just need to be frightened, read about a wind that blows from four corners of the earth, and dead men's bones start to reunite. They start to come together. Bone met the bone it was supposed to be connected to, and then flesh assembled itself upon the bones. Bodily organs and systems began to be resurrected and alive, and soon this dead black army lying on the desert floor dead stood up. Oh my goodness, what would it be like? What would it be like if a dead black army was resurrected in the United States of America, North America, and perhaps my brothers and sisters across the world? All right. We won't deal with what's going on in Ezekiel anymore until the final day of these messages. Here's the why. Because there's some other things I need to speak to you about before we go back and talk about once a resurrected black army stands to its feet, what's the plan? Well, over the next 6 to 7 days, we will lay that plan out. And on the way, we will talk about some other black men in the scriptures. Listen, get over it. Jesus is black. You can't describe somebody as nappy-headed with black feet and think they're anything other than black. Look, this boy had to go down into Africa and hide when he was 2 years old because a decree had gone out to kill all the boy babies under 2. Now, sending a Caucasian child or an Asian child into Africa to hide makes no sense because you stick out. It doesn't matter what the geography is. So Jesus is described as nappy-headed, woolly hair, and black feet, burnt bronze. And so we need to get over that and accept it and realize that our nappy-headed Blackfoot brother came before us. And we're going to be talking a lot about Jesus' contribution to the affairs of humanity and the people that he touched. One that we're going to talk about starting tomorrow. We're going to be talking about a brother, and we'll be coming from the Gospel of Luke chapter 19. We're going to be talking about a brother named Zacchaeus, a brother named Zacchaeus. He was wealthy, but he was an agent. He was a corrupt agent of the first century Jewish church and an agent of the Roman government. He was collecting taxes, but he wasn't just collecting them for them. He was clicking off a little bit for himself besides his salary. People didn't like him. He had an encounter with Jesus. And then we'll go on to talk about a crazy black man who lived in the cemetery because his community had exiled him on day 3. He's a Gadarene demoniac. He really is like some brothers we all know. We got to just admit it. We got to own it. There are some crazy brothers out here. Crazy, organically crazy. Organically, socially, behaviorally crazy. Destructive to themselves and to all other relationships that they might enjoy. On the 4th day, we will talk about an impotent black man who was also rich. We're going to talk about the treasurer of the Candace, the queen of Ethiopia, who's literally the queen over southern Egypt for the time. We're going to talk about what makes a black man give up his ability to reproduce himself just to have money. The next day, we will talk about a poor black man named Lazarus, whose conditions were so bad that only thing he could think to do was just to beg for the things that fell from a rich man's table. Both of them died. You want to hear about that. Then on the next day, we're going to be talking about another man named Lazarus who died while Jesus was on his way to visit. And Jesus literally goes to the tomb where he was buried and calls out his name. Oh my God, what happens when God calls out your name and you're living out dead conditions? Then we'll actually take a look at Jesus himself after having been killed and looking at what his purpose was for coming to the earth and then being executed on behalf of all of humanity. Now, I know everybody doesn't see that the same way, and I'm not here to convince you of anything, only to share points of view. I am a Christian. I am a Christian black man who've been involved in ministry all of my life. My father and my grandfather were ministers of the gospel. I ain't trying to tell you we're perfect. That would be a lie. I'm not even trying to construe that. We have been men who have lived and experienced all the challenges that all those who come before us and will come after us have experienced. But we believe Jesus makes the difference. Jesus takes up the gap. Jesus fills in the blank that we can't fill in. And so we'll talk about the reason Jesus came to earth and the motivation behind his willing to be executed on my behalf and behalf of all humanity, present, past, and future. The last day we'll come back to Ezekiel and we'll talk about, and I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll join me on that day, because we literally need to talk about laying out a strategy for the reorganization for the resurrected black man. Are you listening to me? We need to talk about a strategy for the resurrected black man to then become constructive in relationship with God, constructive in relationship with self, and constructive in relationship with all others, and constructive in relationship with this planet Earth on which we live. Thank God for you. I thank you for joining me. I look forward to the next time we get together, when we will be talking about a rich black man named, boy, I can't get that right today, a rich black man named Zacchaeus. I hope you join me then. Take care. God bless. I'm Oscar Crawford, and this is the teaching ministry of New Eden, celebrating Black History Month 2013.